Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have two members from the Richmond area. Delegate Dolores McQuinn, good to see you.
Good to be here. Good morning.
Senator Jennifer McClellan, good to see you.
Good morning, good to see you.
We're a couple of days away from the end of the session, hopefully, and things appear to be progressing well.
For the most part, yes. We still have to finish the budget. I think that's the big outstanding issue. But from what I hear, they're close on pretty much every issue except higher ed. So hopefully in the next 2 days, we will resolve that and go home.
And of course, Delegate McQuinn, you serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I know you've been privy to all of these issues. So how do you think things are going?
Well, I agree with the senator that we are progressing, and there are still a few, I guess, bumps in the road. But I don't think it's something that we can't resolve and come to a medium. And so it seemed to actually be working better this year than it did last year. So I'm hopeful that we will conclude with all of the matters, and all of us will be able to go home on Saturday.
Great. And we're celebrating the 400th year of the House of Burgess initiation, so to speak. There are a lot of issues. I know that you still head the Martin Luther King Commission. There are a lot of celebrations yet to occur. Talk to us about some of those things.
Sure. Well, we are wrapping up the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. We had done a series of community conversations in each locality that Dr. King visited. There are about 13. We've done 11, so we're going to finish up in Hopewell and Dinwiddie. And then we are finishing up the Emancipation and Freedom Monument that we've been working on. It's a monument that will go on Browns Island. Our artist is in his studio finishing life-size models, and we hope to have that monument completed and unveiled in December as part of the commemoration of the first Africans coming. We are commemorating the 60th anniversary of school closings. There were 5 localities that, in response to Brown versus Board of Education, actually shut down their schools. And so we will be doing some commemorative activities around that. And then our big project that we kicked off this year is our Lynching in Virginia project, which is multifold. Delegate McQuinn and I had resolutions acknowledging with profound regret that racial terror lynchings occurred in the Commonwealth. We, the Commission, are going to collect information on all the recorded lynchings that we can, compile it in one place on our website, and then do community conversations in localities where those lynchings occurred. We're working with the Equal Justice Initiative on their Community Remembrance Project to bring memorials back to the localities where lynchings occurred to help them collect soil samples from lynching sites. And we're working with the Department of Historic Resources to identify lynching sites for historic markers. And the first one ever to commemorate a racial terror lynching in Virginia was approved in December in Charles City County and will be unveiled right by the courthouse in April. So we are very busy, and I think our work is more important now than ever.
Delegate McQuinn, why is it so important that the state of Virginia recognize these lynchings?
And I'm glad that you asked, because, you know, the state of Virginia in this 400-year commemoration, the state of Virginia was leaders in this, as the former capital of the Confederacy, in perpetuating a certain type of mentality where the focus was white supremacists, white privilege, those kind of things. And so when these individuals who lost their lives, and many of them were lynched for no reason other than it was accepted, it was acceptable. And so we feel that strongly that we could help bring relevance, first of all, to their lives, to those who lost their lives, and to the families. And then to acknowledge that, again, what the resolution says with profound regret, Virginia, to acknowledge that this was wrong. This was, matter of fact, a disservice to humanity. And how do we address that? How do we make their lives again relevant? How do we make them, their life and the families worthy to be recognized? And this is one way that we could do it. And actually, this is a very small thing in many ways that we could do to say, what was done was wrong, and we want to be certain that it never happens again.
So I take it also that your other resolution dealing with civil discourse is as important.
Oh, absolutely. And I think all of these things are connected. The dots, connect all of these things, the issues of lynching, the 400th year commemoration of the first recorded African coming to Virginia, the issue of reconciliation and civility. Because, again, Virginia has played a major role in this country in terms of perpetuating a certain mentality, a certain ideology. And with that in mind, how do we get to a place where we begin to move the needle so that people are much more acceptant of one another? When we look at what's going on across the country, not just Virginia, but across the country, what happened in Charlottesville, what happened at Mother Emanuel Methodist Church, all of these things were about racial issues, racial discourse. And I think that if we could lead in helping to create a paradigm shift, Virginia could be the leaders in that, then I think that since we were the leaders in the other piece, I think that we could certainly provide a better landscape for the next generation that will come. And that's what it's all about, making it a better place for generations that will yet come, Jennifer's young ones and my grandbabies. They should live in a better community, a better society, where they are accepted of one another.
And of course, Senator McClellan, you started with your colleagues in terms of truth and reconciliation. How do you implement that outside the confines of the General Assembly?
Well, I think that the importance is to have these conversations. We've spent the past year through the King Commission having what we call beloved community conversations, because everybody knows about Dr. King's dream, but the true mission of his work was to achieve what he called the beloved community, where racism, sexism, war, poverty didn't exist, because everybody recognized the basic value of every human being, regardless of race, creed, color, sex, etc. And so we've been traveling around the Commonwealth asking, where are we today in achieving that beloved community, and where do we go from here? Which is something Dr. King was focused on when he died. And that conversation kind of ended when he died. And especially in Virginia, I remember growing up, I was born in 1972, I'm Generation X. I grew up in an integrated, society, but we never really talked about race. We never really talked about our history, and these scars just festered. When you've suffered a trauma as a human being, you never heal from that trauma until you address it. And the first step is acknowledging what happened to cause it. And so I think if we're ever going to truly achieve the beloved community, we have to talk about our past. It's incredibly frustrating that I never knew there were over 100 African American men who served in the General Assembly during Reconstruction. I didn't know that until the King Commission decided to research that. And the importance of history is not just let's learn some facts and figures and dates. It's let's learn who we are as a people. Where did we come from? What caused us to be what we are today as a society? And if we have a truthful conversation about that, then we can really achieve healing in the beloved community. But the first step is have those conversations at the government level, but in the community level. And so that's why these resolutions are just the beginning of a conversation.
McQuinn, what about those who suggest that we should just get over it?
Well, you know what? Jennifer said the terminology she used in terms of trauma. You know, you don't just get over trauma. You know, you try to get past it, but again, you don't get over it. And when, you know, we have really, truly, as African Americans, been traumatized, and we have not dealt with it. We've lived with it, but we have not dealt with it. And I think that, you know, the thought of just getting over, if you take any individual that are traumatized in life by something that happens, you know, women who have had situations that have affected them, children who have been abused in many ways. The first thing that any psychiatrist would say, or, you know, let's deal with the mental aspect of it. Let's see how we can address what you have gone through to help move you from point A to point B. And that is the same thing. One of the things that we did not have an opportunity to do from generations was to address the trauma of those who were enslaved, and they passed it on from generation to generation. I look at my own life, and Jennifer, I'm not going to say when I was born, but I look at, you know, I am 3 generations away from my ancestors being enslaved. Yeah. And so that mean that my dad wasn't far away from that. And so he passed on whatever trauma he had to deal with. He passed that on. And I think until we deal with the trauma of that and have the dialogue, people, it's okay to just get over it, as they would say, but you just don't get over it. And we, as you can see, we are still dealing with the aftermath of the enslavement of our ancestors right now, with these impoverished communities, the health disparities, the issue of wealth, or generational wealth, the lack thereof. There are so many things that we are still having to deal with as a result of that. So it is not something that you can just get over it. Dialogue is the answer. We need to talk about it. And because every time something happens, once again, we have to relive that trauma. You know, when Charlottesville issue occurred, it took me back, something that I had forgotten, about the KKK coming into a little community off of 9 Mile Road and bombing a store, burning a cross, and I still think about the fear that was in my father's eyes, you know, in his effort to protect his children and his family. So those things we relive. And so it is not something that you get over it. Should we talk about it? Absolutely. And black and white at the table.
And yeah. I think the other reason it's important to talk about it is racism is not the only danger that we face, yes, but race ignorance. And the problem that I see if we don't talk about it is, as you have more and more people born after legal segregation ended, who grew up in an integrated society but don't understand how the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow affects systems, government systems, education systems, and policies that people on their face think are race neutral have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. And if you don't understand why that is, then you'll never address those problems. A lot of the problems we have in our public school systems today directly trace their roots to segregation and massive resistance. Yeah. You know, our housing policy, our you know, the lack of affordable housing, the problems that we have with public housing directly trace their roots back to decisions made during Jim Crow to isolate, you know, black communities in a particular area. I mean, even the decision to build a highway through the middle of a black neighborhood has an impact on that neighborhood today. So not only can we not just heal as a people, but we will never address the systematic racism that was put in place over 100 years ago that's never really been eradicated.
And the thing about systemic and structural racism is that, you know, the only way that you begin to pull down those, barriers and walls is to begin to talk about it. And that way, once you start talking about it, then someone can begin to target it and look at the policies, look at laws, look at those things that continue to hinder, race of people from moving forward. And so it is no other way to address it. And again, people may think that not talking about it, just leaving it alone, that it's okay, but it has been disturbed, and it's disturbed over and over again. It's almost like asbestos. You know what? If you leave it alone, they say there's no problem, but it's still there. And so when you eventually go into pull down a wall or whatnot, then it becomes something that completely harms you. And so, and the same thing about this whole issue. So we must begin to do things to help to eliminate and pull down these walls that have been erected.
Now, it can be very painful, these conversations, and very, very shameful.
Yeah.
How have your colleagues responded?
So when the lynching resolution was presented in the Senate Rules Committee on the first day of Black History Month, there was one member, Senator Henrico, who felt the need to speak against it. And he basically said, why should I have to apologize for something I didn't do? And, we just need to, let this be. You're stirring up old wounds. And my response was, first of all, we're expressing profound regret. I had nothing to do with slavery, but I certainly profoundly regret that it happened. Mm-hmm. And I said basically what I just said and what Delegate McQuinn and I have just said. We have to address this. Now, no one said anything since, but they are uncomfortable conversations because you have to have them in a way. No one wants to be called a racist, and I think the problem is the minute you start to try to have these conversations, people's defenses come up, and it's human nature, but you gotta still do it. And I think, and there are many different types of personalities and ways to have the conversation. My personality is, I do things in a calm, quiet, one-on-one, try to create some comfort, but it's hard. It's hard because, just under the surface, you're angry or you're sad or you can't think about our history and the things that have happened in my own family without being angry and sad. But you can't have this conversation with someone who doesn't understand if you come at them from a place of anger. So it's very difficult, but anything worth doing is difficult. And so we just kind of buck each other up.
Yeah, and I think that, when we look at it, and I keep sharing this with people as I'm talking with them, I said, I just don't think that this is, 400th year commemoration, again, of the first African. We're talking about race relations and some of the other dynamics that have occurred in the last few weeks. I don't think any of it's a coincidence. Matter of fact, as a Baptist minister, I'm just saying God is just giving us a little push here to help us to begin to, you don't have to tiptoe around the tulips or violets or whatever you tiptoe around. He put it out there for us, in the most profound way, the way we weren't expecting it. And so now it forces all of us to come to the table and talk about it. And so I think, personally, that this is a great time to have these conversations. And I think now we have some great allies who are willing to help us, because Jennifer and I can talk about it from one perspective. But the bottom line is, when we look across the country, there's never really been any individual from the white community who was willing to sit on this other side of the table and said, to a degree, I understand, and we must begin to dismantle this systemic structural racism that have held people back. these walls that have been put up and begin to build bridges. And so I think that's what can come out of all of this.
We've spoken a little bit about the wealth gap. Can you trace its origins for us? That's a long story, I know.
I don't know if we can do that in a half an hour, but you know, Dolores kind of touched on it. I mean, so Virginia, people forget, Virginia was founded as a business venture. Virginia was founded by British colonists coming over to do business, whether it was expand land, whether it was trade, but it was a business venture. And from the beginning, they took land from the native people and built wealth based on property. I mean, if you look at who the founding fathers meant, you know, they said you were entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but for them, the pursuit of happiness was own property. And wealth was property owners. And the first people allowed to vote were property owners. When slaves were freed, there, you know, other than your 40 acres and a mule that some people got, not everybody, if you look today at who has land, or now intellectual property has replaced physical property, who has that, who has had business opportunities and who hasn't, that traces its roots directly back to the founding of this of Virginia and the nation as a whole. And so that's part of it. It's also who got the opportunities to be, you know, lawyers, doctors, business owners, you know, own banks, and who were the servants. So it's all tied up. I mean, that's the shortest answer I can give. That's like a master's class that we could teach to really break that down.
And it was generational wealth. So those same families find themselves, you know, with a great capacity, and many of the other families of those who were enslaved find themselves still struggling after all of these years. And so that is, it is just often not understood. And so when people are complaining about the dynamics of where we are or where we aren't, and there's still people, well, why can't you all get it together? You know, I mean, when you have for generations been in poverty, and so along with that come all the other disparities, come all the other voids that some people have opportunity to have, then that's why you can't get it together. So, you know, and she talked about the intellectual component of it as well, you know. It's just, you tend not to, when you're in poverty, it tends to, unless some great thing happened in your life, it tends to be generation after generation after generation. And the same thing with wealth.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about, and put on your clergy hat for this, because I'm sure that some of these discussions are taking place in places of worship. But as we know, places of worship are still very segregated. How do we deal with that issue?
I think that, and yeah, the discussion, they're happening in areas of worship. And I think that because you have a captive audience, it's a great place to have these kind of discussions. But again, the most segregated place in the country certainly is the church. Now, and I look at that in many ways, because in terms of my environment as an African American, my experience of worship may very well be different than the experience of worship for whites, for the white community. And what is my choice? Do I want this integrated because I want to have a worship experience, or do I integrate it because I just think it's important to be there, black and white, in the same space? And I think that most individuals choose to say, I want to worship here because I want a certain worship experience. And as you know, if you look back at when during period of enslavement, African Americans could only go to the balcony while whites worshipped on the floor, and then there were no African American ministers, or none who were enslaved who were ministers. They had to basically depend on the white community to allow them to have a worship experience. So there are so many, intertwined in that whole, church, religion, spiritual relationship with God is intertwined, and that is a lot that was going on. And so I think that maybe we're trying to move to another place, but we are a long way from that. And I know with the reconciliation task force that we are dealing with, Virginians for Reconciliation, we're talking about the exchange of pulpit and exchange of congregation. So that would be one way to address it.
And there are some efforts and signs of hope, if not integrating the churches directly, but more partnering on things. So First Baptist Church here in Richmond, in my district, was originally an integrated congregation over 200 years ago. And eventually the white church broke off, and it's the First Baptist Church on Monument Avenue, and the black church is First African Baptist Church in Northside. But they have the same Founders Day, and today they recognize they have the same Founders Day, and their congregations come together on that Founders Day, and they partner on a lot of activities. So that's one example. At one of our beloved community conversations in Lynchburg, there was a white pastor who had talked about how he was working together to bring congregations together for field trips and projects and worship together. So I think there's still opportunities for people to come together, even if they decide, I want to worship in this particular church. That doesn't mean they turn their back on other congregations.
About a minute and a half left, but I wanted both of you to be given an opportunity to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment for women.
Interesting. Well, I have to applaud the Senate for the work that you all have done and for getting it passed out. Of course, the House, we're still there, and so it'll be interesting. It doesn't appear that it will be moving anywhere this year, but I have, encouraged everyone to stay in the fight. Another year will come.
And I'll just say, I was really hoping that Virginia would be the state, in this important commemorative year to put it over the top. There's still several other states, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arizona, Minnesota, all have legislation to do it this year. So I think now we encourage our colleagues in those states to get it done. And if not, then we'll be back in 2020. Yeah. And this is an issue that is not going to go away.
Why is it so important to you, Delegate McQuinn?
You know what? It's very important to me because I want my daughter is a certain age now, but I have a 5-year-old granddaughter and and a 10-month-old granddaughter. And I want them to know and help understand that they have every opportunity to do and be whatever they want without any hindrance, without any barriers. And I think even though people say, well, you have those rights, well, put it in words if you think that I deserve those rights.
Thank you both for being here, Delegate Dolores McQuinn and Senator Jennifer McClellan. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.